How many of us have shared time with a cat or a dog in our life? Many, many of us. How many of you knew when that animal was unhappy with you? Some of us. How many knew when it was really, really happy with you? Every morning I have a ritual of doing a crossword puzzle with a cup of coffee and my cat Bella in my lap. Our dog Phoebe is usually still in the bedroom with Becky as she goes about her morning routine. Once in a while, if Phoebe is up before Bella finishes her breakfast, Phoebe will run out as I sit down and ask for attention because she's jealous of the attention the cat gets and the privileged place of the lap. Often when I'm sitting at my computer, Phoebe will be curled up in her little dog bed a few feet away, and the cat will come in and jump into my lap, and Phoebe eyes the cat. Big sigh. When I leave the house during the day, Phoebe appears to have separation anxiety and is very sad if I'm leaving. I try to work with that. The late neuroscientist Jaak Panksepp studied emotions in animals, in mammals in particular. He is most famous perhaps for tickling rats. He was doing work at Bowling Green State University in Ohio and trying to figure out what motivates rats and how we can learn about their emotional states and systems. And they saw that they would play together and tickle each other. They would do a little tickling thing. Well, why do we know that's a pleasant thing? Well, they keep doing it. That seems like it's a thing. They don't attack each other after they do it, so it must be a thing they like. What if we try and do that? I couldn't really guarantee that was what was going on. And they decided to use a microphone that had a wider variety of sounds it could hear. Frequencies, I guess is what people call those things. And they could hear the rats laugh at a frequency above human hearing. And if they would pet it on a back, the rat was angry. It would try to bite you. But if you turned it over and tickled its belly, it would make this little chirping sound at a frequency above our hearing. They could reproduce that tickle, they could reproduce that joy in the rat. They also studied isolation distress in chickens. Chicks, when they are first born, are desperate to be near their mother, like most of us are, right? That is the source of food and safety. And so, of course, little babies want to be near their mothers. Chicks in particular make a little sound that indicates that they're lonely, that they're scared, that they want to be near their mother. By a few weeks old, they've stopped doing that very much. But if you put a corticotropin releasing factor in their brain, which blocks the opioids from working, then even older chicks will cry like a newborn again because their brains are feeling loneliness and sadness. Panksepp and his fellow researchers have got 7 well-documented emotional command systems that they assert are in all mammalian brains. They call them seeking, rage, fear, lust, care, panic, and play. Now, in his TEDx talk, he linked words that are more commonly used by non-scientists. Seeking, which he says some people still call the reward system in the brain, is linked to enthusiasm. Mammals seek all the time. They seek food, they seek water, they seek companionship, they seek mates, they seek knowledge about their surroundings. There's an enthusiasm. We wake up wanting to seek. Coffee and a crossword. For me, seeking is a primal emotion in mammals. Rage is pretty self-explanatory. Fear is pretty self-explanatory. Lust, also self-explanatory. which is different from care because it's more tender and loving and nurturing. Now we're getting back to last week's want you, need you, love you differentiation. The thing they call panic is what I would call lonely or sad for the most part. And then play is joy. And there's a part of our brain that wants to play. I think that's a cool thing. When I was in clinical pastoral education, the way that we were taught about emotions, that there are 4 main emotions, and they have a cute little rhyme: mad, sad, glad, and scared. So we have mad, sad, glad, and scared, except that glad is sort of split out into seeking and lust and care and play. And that does make some sense that those are different kinds of pleasant things happening to us. My therapist insists that I not say that the emotions are good or bad. They are pleasant to have or difficult to have. They all give us information. He also says you're right to have the feelings you are having, not that you are morally correct in experiencing that, but that you're not morally incorrect. The society talks about how displaying some emotions, or certainly displaying them loudly, is inappropriate. And he wants to be sure we know that having the emotion is not a bad thing. So we'll talk more about that in a little while. One of the really exciting things that Panksepp was doing 5 years ago when he passed away is testing the idea of treating depression by stimulating the seeking circuits in our brains. The seeking system no longer working means we have no more enthusiasm. We don't have any interest in engaging our surroundings. That seems like depression to me. And at least in his life, after a significant loss, once the panic grief system is set in gear, that sort of prevents the seeking system from functioning vigorously. And if you don't recover from that, that seeking system can spiral and we sink into depression. The experiments he was doing 5 years ago showed some promising results in stimulating the seeking system in people that had severe depression and them having enthusiasm again for life and living. There are scientists that are continuing that work. Now, I should also note some people disagree with Panksepp and his ideas. They want to debunk the idea that you can pinpoint areas of the brain. They don't think that you can say that this particular circuit in the brain is where anger comes from, and that particular circuit is where fear comes from. They may have some points here, but I would stress that I think it's more about they don't want to admit that non-human animals have emotions too, because we might have to rethink a lot of the ways that we treat them. And that might even make us rethink the ways we treat our human beings. It's just easier to believe that animals are completely different from us. And there's also a piece that even if you don't know that specific piece, I think the idea that there are 7 driving emotional centers in all of these mammalian brains, it just makes a ton of sense with my lived experience in my own life, in the animals, both domesticated and feral, that I've been around, and certainly us human beings sometimes. The power of emotions in our lives. Emotions are part of the core processing. They are significant drivers of what we do. They're not just the byproducts of minds that we can ignore, as some behaviorists think. And I think that's why, because they're so significant and so powerful, we humans have this approach avoidance thing with emotion. And it's not just that we approach the pleasant ones and we avoid the difficult ones. That's part of it. It's more this complex approach avoidance piece. As I was talking about last week, there is science and there is art and there is wonder in all of those places. The science and logic and willpower side says that emotions are distractions at best. They are uncontrollable and should be avoided. Whereas the artistic side says strong emotion of all kinds can produce amazing art, bring on more emotion. And then grounding all of this in wonder, noting that it is a natural, normal part of all humans, all mammals. It is powerful, it can do harm, it can benefit us. We need to learn about our emotional systems. And if we can't learn to control them, at least learn how to interact with them and tweak them a bit. And honestly, we human beings have not been doing that super well in my experience. In our first reading this morning, when the mother was trying to read from Charlotte's Web and crying when she said she died alone, and then she pulls herself together and says, "I'm okay," to her children. I wish that I'm okay meant she was teaching her children that experiencing emotion is part of the human experience and can be a good thing, not "I'm okay now that I'm no longer having an emotion." And it is wondrous to think of your mother's voice years after she's passed. I have that feeling sometimes. I'll bet others in this room do. To be honest, sometimes we got too much of my mother's voice. Several years ago, when we had her memorial service, I wasn't up to delivering a eulogy. I did write one out, but I did not deliver it. And in that undelivered eulogy, I wrote about one thing I'll always remember about her is that she always blew up during the holidays. She put immense pressure on herself to have the perfect Norman Rockwell dinner at every holiday. And when it finally dawned on her that day that it wasn't going to happen, she would start yelling at somebody. And she would yell for a few moments, and then she'd cry a little while, and then we'd go back and proceed and have a fine family holiday. In this and in other ways, she taught us emotions are only to be shared if they're positive. You should hide them if you have to have them at all, and they're regrettable when you deliver them in public. And by the way, emotions are usually dangerous or scary or hurtful. I made infrequent visits to Sunday school and to vacation Bible school. Those weren't particularly helpful either. Basically, I learned that good people don't behave in angry ways, so just don't have those emotions. I read a lot of fantasy books growing up, and the heroes turned their suffering or their anger into spectacular deeds. Didn't ever really say how they did that. Never talked about their feelings. They just channeled them into heroicism, which maybe worked, I don't know. Science fiction, kind of the same thing. Heroes, adding some rationality and some willpower thrown in. That's why I had us sing our opening hymn, Enter, Rejoice, and Come In, as if you could command someone to feel joy, or don't be afraid of some change, as if that were possible. You certainly can't tell people not to be afraid of something. When I first got married with Becky all those years ago, I was still really reeling from all these lessons in my life. And whenever I got the slightest bit upset with our life together, that feeling of anger would be scary to me. I would hide it. I would push it down and not even admit to myself that I had it. I would walk around like the grumpy monkey from the Story for All Ages, sometimes for over a week, before Becky, like the big ape in the story, would say, "Are you grumpy?" And like the monkey, "I'm not grumpy." Okay. Eventually, after denying it and subconsciously working harder to repress it, eventually She would demand I would talk, and I would yell, and she would listen, and we would figure it out. By the time I was in seminary for a while, we celebrated the emotional progress I had made. It no longer took me weeks to feel my feelings. I was down to 48 hours sometimes. Still don't always experience emotions in real time these days. I often can or do, and I don't always flee them when I'm experiencing them, but sometimes I'm able to sit with them and notice what information that's giving me about what's going on. One thing that has particularly helped in all of that is meditation. And not just meditative activities, those are also good for you, but just sitting there, watching your brain work, watching the thoughts and feelings arise and come and go, watching how you get distracted and move off and start thinking about this thing and planning and blah, 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 blah. Oh, right. Back to here. Eventually, at least for me, it has worked that I don't go off like this all the time, and I'm quicker at coming back to center. And the more I can do that, the more I'm able to not feel the things too long. If I don't heap attention on them, the feelings come and they go away. And the more I can do that, the closer to living in the present moment I get. And then I can live with my emotions and choose to act according to my principles, and the more present I can be with the people around me. Louise Erdrich, only do that what destroys the insulation between yourself and your experience, or what pulls down, or what strikes at, or what shatters this rouge you call necessity. We and the society we have built are so good at distracting ourselves from feeling difficult emotions. And the more that we can feel them and be in them and be here together, the more likely it is that we'll save our world from Ukraine and all the other things that are going on these days. And I'm really glad to be a Unitarian Universalist, where I can have a place to explore and find wonder in Western science and Eastern philosophy and art and poetry and song of all kinds. I'm glad to have your companionship, your support, and your challenge along the way. So may we be. Cool thing about having an offering here